back to the podium.
Good morning, one and all, friends and family of Karl Watson. It's a great honor for me to be here to commemorate the life of somebody who has made such a major contribution to Barbados' understanding of themselves and even into the wider Caribbean. It's the first time I'm going to be using this modern technology. I loved my pieces of paper beforehand, but you will forgive me because it was such, thank you, it was such a varied life and such varied contributions that I am going to have to appeal to you for a little time to represent as succinctly as possible the contributions that Karl has made. We gather here today to lay to rest and to celebrate the life of Dr. Karl Stewart Watson, outstanding Barbadian historian, archaeologist, university lecturer, naturalist, former member of the Barbadian Foreign Service, and multifaceted cultural icon. He passed away at his home at the Garrison in St. Michael on Saturday evening, the 11th of January, 2025, after battling with cancer. In reflecting on his life, the words of the Dominican poet, novelist, and minister of government in the short-lived Federation of the West Indies, Phyllis Chand Alfrey, comes to mind. Love for an island is the sternest passion, pulsing beyond the blood through roots and loam. It overflows the boundary of bedrooms and courses past the fragile walls of home. Theirs is no mild attachment, but rapacious, craving for possession rude and whole. Lovers of islands drive their stake, prospecting to run the flag of patriotism up the pole. Their passion drives them to perpetuation. They dig, they plant, they build, and they aspire to the eternal landmark that when they die, perhaps the forest covers up their set desire. Karl lived his life to the fullest, grasping every moment from the age of 2 years old as he began to explore reading and the written word entirely on his own, developing a skill which would be his life's creation and companion. His childhood was spent on Culloden Road and among his mother's family on Beccles Road around the corner. The love for his close and wider family was deep and lasting. His playing field was the Bay pasture and his playmates, the children of Bayland, that anchored him in this deep love for the widest possible majority of people in Barbados. His introduction to the sea was at Browns Beach and Burke's Beach, where he discovered the natural life of the ocean and moved into being a competitive swimmer and member of one of the water polo teams active at the time. He was a keen student at Harrison College on Crumpton Street, not far from here, developing his interest in history, languages, and literature. As a Harrisonian scholar of a younger generation, Dr. Richard Drayton has put it, and I quote, "Karl was always mindful of his intersecting minority experience, the difference in birth and outlook, part of a poor to middling urban so-called white Barbadian experience, along with another unspoken and yet powerful difference within him, the love that dare not speak its name, as Victorians would say, which together made him the creative and fearless person that he was. A lover of art of all kinds, in a society often careless about such things. I suspect, says Drayton, that his care for the world was partly nourished by that sense of difference and vulnerability. But this minority position did not hold Karl back from identifying and immersing himself with the life of the majority of his fellow Barbadians. He loved dance and local traditional music and calypsos, participating in the attempted introduction of Trinidad-style carnival to Barbados at Kensington Oval in 1959. I noticed that there's a photograph of him dressed as the Knave of Hearts at the age of 15 at that carnival celebration. And also becoming a member of a dance group that explored new dance forms in emergent Barbadian cultural diversity at the time. Peculiarly, in spite of all this local Caribbean fervor, he loved country western. I used to say, Karl, you really like that music? And boy, did he, including the dancing of it. His first job was with the Royal Bank of Canada, and the manager at the time, realizing Karl's sort of wider knowledge and good feeling with visitors, he would get Karl to deal with some of his more distinguished clients. And one of them that Karl never forgot was the Rainey of Sarawak. She was the last Rainey of Sarawak, that small autonomous semi-colony in the Far East. And she, that is the Rainey, retired here in Barbados, and Karl and her would have long conversations. He was an early student at the University of the West Indies, Barbados campus, both at its early harbour site and at Cave Hill, where he was an active member of the Student Council, organizing events and representing student needs. He then moved to the University of Florida at Gainesville, where he was introduced to archaeology. And there he experienced, for the first time, the US racial presumption, being literally issued with a race card, which he regaled people about for years afterwards. Coming from the Caribbean, applying as a West Indian student, I understand with no ID identification, pictorial identification, all his forms were filled out and he was given an ID card. Karl Watson, race Negro, because he came from the Caribbean. And he would use this card, it may still be there among his things, to show people, you know, the peculiarity of people's assumptions about race in comparison with the US and the Caribbean. Then, yes, Watson became a senior lecturer at the, now you see that? Is it, well, that's the first time I'm dealing with this technology, so you have to give me a little break. He moved from the University of Florida. Watson became a senior lecturer in the Department of History at UE and taught at the Mona campus, Jamaica, during the 1980s. He injured his foot during Hurricane Gilbert, mistakenly going up on the roof of his residence during a lull in the storm, and was blown off when the other wall of the eye of the hurricane swept upon him. This caused a lifelong injury to his foot, which he never quite fully overcame. He became totally consumed with Jamaican history, culture, and art. And with his skill with languages, he slipped into the Jamaican dialect with ease, as he did with Haitian Creole that he mastered during his many visits to that neighboring island to Jamaica. Back at UE in Barbados, he introduced the Master's Program in Heritage Studies. He wanted to make sure that it was not simply a Barbados-centric exercise, and therefore ensured that he organized student visits to neighboring islands to give them a comparative experience of the multifaceted nature of Caribbean culture. Once, when a plane was delayed and couldn't fly out of Arnasville Airport way back in the days when they had in St. Vincent, the smaller airport near Kingstown, and they were put in a rather shoddy guest house overnight where he couldn't sleep, Karl picked up the St. Vincent and Grenadines phone book and spent his night going through it, ticking off all the Bajan family names, identifying the movement of so many Barbadians to St. Vincent and the Grenadines, particularly to Bequia. He was editor of the Journal for the Barbados Museum for 20 years, and served on the museum board. He was honorary secretary, for a time, president of the Barbados National Trust, chairman of the George Washington House Restoration Committee and the Barbados Carolinas Committee. His publications include the 1979 book, Barbados, the Civilized Island, A Social History, 1750 to 1816, which he told me in the last couple of years he had wanted to revise, and of course that never came to pass. But it is still an important contribution to understanding the development and change in Barbadian society. He also dealt with the book, The White Minority of the Caribbean, with H. Johnson, and A Kind of Right to be Idle, Old Doll, Matriarch of Newton Plantation, which is an in-depth analysis of a Barbadian slave on Newton Plantation. This focused on an analysis of the Newton Papers, which were the letters passed between Thomas Lane and his various agents and managers in Barbados. It tells of the family of Old Doll, a so-called house slave on the Newton Plantation, which is now a major topic of discussion and attention at this time. Among other publications, to show you the variety of work, was The 4 Centuries of Barbados Migration from 2020, Judaism in Barbados from the 17th century, done in 2021, and Our Forgotten Cousins, Poor Whites of Barbados. From this group of Barbadians, he had tremendous respect, and indeed a certain pride as being part of them. The famous photograph of a group of poor white fishermen gathered on the beach at Bath in St. John, some literally dressed in sackcloth, feature a number of his Watson ancestors. And he never forgot, because I know that with his cousins and brother and others, he from time to time would go down at Zore's there at Martins Bay, particularly at Christmas time, and share some good cheer with them. Because he knew that this was very much part of his life. He also did a book of historic photographs, Barbados First, The Years of Change, 1920 to 1970, which has comments under the photographs giving great insight into the pictorial background to Barbados life. Among numerous other articles and papers he did for both general reading, academic magazines, and journals. Watson was an expert on the Jewish presence in Barbados. And just before his passing, he completed a book on the Jewish synagogue in Bridgetown with the encouragement and support from Paul Ortman, now awaiting publication. As part of heritage studies, he taught archaeology at Cathedral campus and led archaeological fieldwork at sites in Bridgetown, primarily the Jubilee Gardens, the Pierhead, and in the grounds of the Jewish synagogue and at George Washington House site at the Garrison, among others. He was a leader in the archaeology of the African presence in Barbados, and besides his particular interest in the cemetery of Fontebelle and Pierhead as well. He was also involved in field research of the pre-Columbian indigenous people of Barbados, so that in essence his work encompassed all of the ethnic groups that influenced Barbados life on many levels. He conducted tours to points of interest throughout the island, and of particular interest in walking tours of Bridgetown. And this shows, the variety or skipping from one interest and one passion to another. He was a Latin Americanist with a special interest in Brazil, and in the run-up to Barbados' independence in 1966, interpreted for the Latin American delegates, while on the night of the independence celebrations in November, he served as assistant to the representative of El Salvador. He was chairman of the Barbados Carolinas Committee, promoting awareness of the historical links between the two. And I could tell you some marvelous stories about him going up to South Carolina, with a tuck band, and saying, this Mother Sally there, originally it was a man dressed up as a woman, and this is how it must be done. And he went to a dollar store and got a wig, and he borrowed some women's clothes from somebody, and there in the library in South Carolina, he performed with the tuck band the whole tradition of Mother Sally. This was really, academia in its broadest sense. So he was, besides being chairman of that, it was during, and his assistance at Independence, it was during Independence celebrations that he befriended the singers, the Supremes, the US singers who came to entertain in Barbados. And Karl actually got so involved that he taught a couple of them to swim in the Hilton Hotel swimming pool. There was a little more that went on besides, but I'm not going to deal with that right here. On another occasion, he gave Bob Marley a tour around Barbados, with Bob riding pillion on Karl's motorbike. Boy, I would have loved to have seen that one. And that was in the days when, Bob was in his early days and reggae was beginning to stream its way through the Caribbean. As an officer of the Barbados Diplomatic Service, Karl served in Latin America and Europe, attached to the consulates in Venezuela, Frankfurt, Germany, and Ottawa. He was fluent in French, Spanish, Portuguese, and German. Even beyond his official position, he was on call, prepared to provide information and assistance on various levels to all the Barbadian prime ministers, from independence to the time of his passing. He was serving in Venezuela when the Cubana air disaster occurred off Barbados in October 1976, and was thrown into action as a diplomat go-between during the tensions between Venezuela, Cuba, the United States, and Barbados, working with the then Prime Minister, Tom Adams. He was awarded the Golden Crown of Merit in 2011 for his services in diplomacy and the many other facets of Barbadian life. Karl was a passionate naturalist with a strong determination to protect Barbadian and Caribbean wildlife, be they birds, monkeys, and sometimes I didn't agree with him on this, but monkeys or regional whales. His anger at the killing of whales off St. Vincent and the Grenadines, particularly Bequet, always riled him. He criticized the tradition of shooting migrant birds passing through Barbados on their exhausting annual flight from the Arctic Circle to the tip of South America at Tierra del Fuego and back. He thought of the birds. He would say, but you don't understand the distance that these poor little birds are traveling, and then to be shot in a swamp in Barbados. So he did create a lot of local enemies in that regard, but he stood by it. That was his nature. He had a passion for ornithology, finding again, and he was a consultant to the creation of Graham Hall Bird Sanctuary, persuading the financier Peter Allard to purchase the wetlands for protection and preservation. I'm glad to see that this has been revived and is probably going to be redeveloped in terms of its natural wealth, natural richness, and its position as we speak. He was also Barbados' ornithological representative to CITES and a member of the National Biodiversity Committee. His involvement and contributions were not limited to Barbados. As with Graham Hall, he persuaded Peter Allard to purchase agricultural lands adjacent to the Mont Diablotin National Park on Dominica to create the Syndicate Parrot Preserve for the protection of the 2 endemic parrots of the island, the larger of which, the Cicero or Amazona imperialis, is emblazoned on the national flag of Dominica. Watson used all manner of communications to promote public knowledge of aspects of Barbadian heritage through the popular media and performance and appearance in film documentaries. many of them produced by Sherwood McCaskey of CBC. Their documentary on the Charter of Barbados won a Caribbean Broadcasting Union Award. And Karl participated with others, including Sir Henry Fraser, in historical documentaries, and one in particular of Spikestown, as well as those featuring Barbadian monuments, tales from the tomb, and trees and architecture. Thankfully, these presentations still exist. So the technology has allowed us that his image and information that he imparted lives on in film media. He acted as George Washington for the weekly Dinner with George event associated with the George Washington House. And here today are the people associated with him in this, not least Anne Rudder, his costume designer, and might I add, the lady who repainted this wonderful arch here within the cathedral. Another historical character he portrayed was Captain John Powell on the occasion of the ceremony that accompanied the refurbishment of the Whole Town Monument, Barbados, in 2016. For this, he was publicly rebuked by critical academics. But Karl's view, as in the commemoration of other such events, was that it was a historic episode that for good or ill changed Barbados whether we like it or not, and we could not escape or erase its influence. Karl will not be around, maybe in spirit. Karl will not be around for the 400th anniversary of Captain Powell's visit, as he claimed Barbados for the English crown, which comes up later this year, if such an event is observed at all. But it is on a moment like that when Karl's presence and participation will be recalled. As Richard Drayton remembers, and I quote, "Karl would surprise you with his poise, energy, capacity for engagement. His curiosity with the world was deep. He was a historian with a care for the past because of that curiosity and care about people, animals, nature, architecture, and the land in the present. I know of no one who knew so deeply and well the natural, architectural, social, and cultural history of Barbados. He loved every grain of sand of the island, and he expressed that love and care, sometimes grieving care, for every aspect of it. He embodied intelligent and compassionate citizenship. What so many people also remember, on top of all of this, was his wit and love for humor and the telling of a good joke. He was meticulous with the accuracy of his research. This was to fully understand the wider issues of what shaped the Barbadian character and society we know today. One example of this was the question of the leaders and participants in the Easter Rebellion of 1816, when he delivered a bicentenary lecture and spoke out that other martyrs of 1816 revolt must be recognized. His net of research was spread wide. He pointed to the various methods used at the time to collect evidence on the revolt that included local reports from House of Assembly, plantation documents, newspaper accounts, letters of private individuals, maps, flags, and banners, as well as oral traditions. He said, "I am conscious of the fact that people may see me as wanting to cry down Bussa or displace Bussa. That is not what I am doing. But I honestly feel that a number of people paid for their participation with their lives, and the documents do indicate that these were very important people in the planning process and the execution process. Why should we exclude them when they are giving thanks and praise 200 years later? Why should they not be included? Don't you see it as a slap in the face to dead people or an injustice?" he asked his audience. That was Karl, to be prepared to defend the wider position and outlook, even in the face of scathing opposition from some other academics seeking to demean him. Many people have posted and sent memories and quotes that represent their feelings to Karl, and among them is one from Gail Seal, who sent a poignant note quoting Leo Buscaglia, American author and professor at the University of Southern Florida. And that quote states, "I know for certain that we never lose the people we love, even to death. They continue to participate in every act, thought, and decision that we make. Their love leaves an indelible imprint in our memories. We find comfort in knowing that our lives have been enriched by having shared their love," unquote. So Karl's love for Barbados and all things Barbadian and Caribbean was passionate, and his life touched so many, both within his beloved island and beyond. And as for Phyllis Shand Alfrey's poem, Love for an Island, concludes, so does this celebration and reflection of Karl's life as we commit his body to his island soil. And I quote that last verses of her poem. Their passion drives them to perpetuation. They dig, they plant, they build, and they aspire to the eternal landmark. For when they die, the forest may cover up their set desire. The hopes they work for may decay, yet they achieve the ultimate memorial. They blend their flesh with the beloved clay. So today, we lay him with love and respect into that beloved clay, which gave him life and was the focus of his living. Thank you very much.